Hi everybody, I'm Bill Whittle and I'm here with my associate fame mafia kingpin Andrew Fat Louis Klavan, which is an odd name for him because he's neither fat nor has Louis anywhere in his name.
No.
These things fall where they may sometimes. You're
It's
not going to argue with the Don.
And who argues, right?
Nobody argues with the Don.
You wind up in a fish tank.
Andrew, fish tank, yeah. Yeah, it took me 7.5 years to drown. Andrew, your question today comes from Will Do Math for Food. Clever name. And the question is Christianity uniquely qualified among all religions as the best basis for freedom and prosperity? And if so, why?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. The freedom really only has developed in Christendom. It's only it's the byproduct of hundreds of years, thousands of years of being shaped by Christendom. And the people who don't understand that are kind of standing on the shoulders of a giant and thinking that they're floating in midair. You know, I mean, that's not the way it works. The ideas that developed into certainly the American way of freedom are Christian ideas, and I would even say they're more Christian. Won't even call them Judeo-Christian. And the reason is this. Let me put it. If so, why? Every Eastern philosophy essentially says that the human experience is an illusion. The internal human experience is an illusion. Western science says that the internal human experience is essentially an illusion. It's just, you know, there's no you there. It's just the brain. You is just a hallucination the brain is having about itself. Only Christianity says that's absolutely wrong. The internal human experience is the image of God. And plus, there is a human experience such that it is aligned with God, because we know this because of the presence of Jesus, who is God incarnate. We know that there's an internal human experience that is God-like, that is, represents God. That means that every human experience becomes sacred. Every individual human experience becomes sacred. There's no other philosophy. There's no other philosophy from which you can reach that conclusion. You know, most people say that truth is relative, absolute moral truth is relative. Some people say that it's objective, but there's no God, which makes absolutely no sense. You just can't make that argument. But in Christianity, what they say is the subjective truth, the subjective experience is sacred. And once you say that, that means that the guy who's scrubbing the floor and the scientist in his lab and the professor and the housewife and everybody is equally precious and equally valid and must be preserved. And that's where you get this idea that you have some natural right to be what you are. It's true that it takes thousands of years from the crucifixion to the moment when people start to think the ramifications of it through, but that's what people are like. They take a long time to figure things out. The point is you cannot get there from any other direction. And when we start to talk about a post-Christian world, as they're already doing in Europe, you're talking about a post-free world, and you only have to look at the results to see that it's true. You can argue that you can have freedom without Christianity, but I'd like to see it done because I've never seen it done before. Only in those places that in some way are connected to, rooted in Christianity, do you have the kind of freedom that we talk about in America, which is individual freedom against all odds, against all comers, against all injustices, individual freedom first. Well,
first of all, there's no question about the fact that the founders stated that this form of government was only suited to religious people, and this idea that they were a bunch of atheists is just utter nonsense. They talked about the essential Christianity being the underpinning and the foundation of everything that was going to happen politically for this country. I've made the argument 100 times before, just to say it in passing. The idea of freedom is the ability to be left alone. And the only way you can leave people alone is if they have an internal governor on their behavior rather than an external system of very rigid laws, as in Sharia, where nothing is allowed and there's the thought police are whipping people in the streets kind of thing. If you have an internal governance of conscience, you can be left alone because most of the time you'll do the right thing and you won't be a jerk, and we don't have to have a giant police state to keep you in line. That idea of an internal virtue, an internal conscience, is really the Christian ideal, that comes from within. It's not a religion of law, it's a religion of internal relationship to the divine. The final thing I'll just say is I've spent a great deal of time, I got started on it almost by accident, now I'm just hooked. It's all I read now. I spent a great deal of time reading about Stalin, and then I started reading about the czars and the Bolshevik takeover and Rasputin and all this stuff. And the bestiality of the Bolsheviks boggles the mind.
Yeah.
No matter how many times you go at it from how many different sources, you simply cannot believe that humans could be as venal as these Bolsheviks were with this sort of militant atheism, this hatred of the individual. And it not only, this Bolshevik revolution really began by shooting 4 of the most beautiful, elegant, and harmless duchesses, grand duchesses, the children of the Tsar, who did nothing but help out in hospitals, had nothing to do with politics. And this 13-year-old boy, they're just shot to death. And from there, off it goes. All of the Bolsheviks that murdered all the Romanovs were all killed by the later generation of Bolsheviks. They were killed by Stalin's people and so on. Murder, 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 murder. And only because, as you said, there was no divinity in anybody. They were a problem, they were a number, they were a case, they were somebody who had to be removed for the glorious future that's always just around the horizon.
Yeah,
the idea that the baby girl's soul would outlast the Earth and is in fact more important than all of the planets in the solar system is a profoundly freeing and protective idea.
Yeah, you know, there's a scene in the Old Testament, because I should go back and say that this idea is inherent in Judaism as well, because there's a scene in the Old Testament where the people come to the prophet Samuel and they say, we want a king. Yeah. And Samuel says, you got to be kidding me.
We got a God.
Yeah. And God says, don't worry, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And I think that when we look at the world that is becoming increasingly a post-Christian, post-religious world, we're looking at a world where freedom is decaying, and that is the proof of the pudding.
I think you're right. So we have time for it today, but you can always let us know what questions you'd like answered in the comment section located below. For Andrew, which is where the rest of us are heading, which is where those guys in the booth are heading. For Andrew Klavan and PJTV, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.